All right, this is the video for class 10 on evaluating arguments by analogy. So I'm just going to quickly go over how to evaluate arguments by analogy, and then I've got some answers to some of the questions that were on the exercise sheet. So let's just start by reviewing. In the previous class, we analyzed the parts of an argument by analogy. We said that an argument by analogy wasn't just any old comparison used for any reason. It specifically was something that happened when you said that because two things are similar in one respect, they are likely to also be similar in another respect. So the parts then of the argument by analogy are the reference analog, which is the side of the comparison that's better known, the target analog, which is the side of the comparison you're making an inference about, and then the known similarity, which is in one of the premises, and the inferred similarity, which is asserted in the conclusion and also in the other premise. So in general, we say that arguments, specific forms of arguments go with argumentation schemes. We define this as a style of argument with established virtues and drawbacks and a set of critical questions to ask and reply. That is, you've got your sort of the general idea of an argument, which is something that you can put in standard form. And then there's a specific kind of standard form you use for specific kinds of arguments. And then with them, there are similarly, there are questions you can ask of any argument, and then there are specific questions that you ask given a particular style of argument or argumentation scheme. So this was the argumentation scheme for argument by analogy. Here, let's just compare it to the standard form. Any argument is going to have some premises and then a conclusion. And then here we just make that more specific by saying in an argument by analogy, the first premise has to say that two things are similar because they both have a known similarity. Then the second premise has to say that the reference analog also has this property that's in the inferred similarity. And the conclusion is that the target analog has the inferred similarity. So the critical questions are questions that you ask once you've analyzed an argument by putting it in standard form. And there are critical questions that go with any argument, and there are critical questions that go with certain forms of argument. So for any argument, we ask, are the premises true, or at least plausible? Do the premises support the conclusion? And has any relevant information been omitted from the premises? There are more specific questions that we can ask about arguments by analogy. The first four help us evaluate the strength of the inference, and the last one has to do with information that might be missing. So when we're evaluating the strength of the inference, we want to ask how many reference analogs there are. So if you've got a bunch of analogies, that's more powerful than a single analogy. If the reference analogs are diverse, that will help you. If you're pulling in reference analogs from a number of different areas, but they all wind up the same way, that helps you. You want the analogs to all be similar to the target analog in specific ways that are relevant. So you want to, for question 3, you want to ask how many ways there are. For question 4, you want to ask how relevant they are. Question 5 is the focus, actually, of most arguments over arguments by analogy. When someone puts forward an argument by analogy, a standard way to reply is to look for differences. So question 5 becomes the focus. Are there any important differences, in this case, between the reference and target analogs? Okay, so that's the overview. Now I'm going to give you some examples based on the homework problems, and I'm going to switch to an older video. Steve is drawing on lessons from the past. He says, Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires for a reason. The Soviet Union invaded in 1979 but was unable to control the country. The British Empire fought 3 wars in Afghanistan and lost every one. In older times, neither Genghis Khan nor Alexander the Great was able to control the Afghan population. The mountainous terrain is too difficult for outside armies to handle. The United States would be foolish to think an invasion of Afghanistan would be anything other than a quagmire. So let's start by putting this in standard form. Premise 1 is just the list of empires that have failed to control Afghanistan. Premise 1 is there's a list of empires that have tried to control Afghanistan. Premise 2 is that every other one of these invasions ended in a quagmire. No one was able to successfully control the population. And the conclusion, the thing that the speaker wants you to believe, is that the United States occupation will be a quagmire. It will not be successful. All right. So in this case, our reference analogs are occupation by Afghanistan by the Soviet Union, the British Empire, the British Empire 3 times, Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great. The target analog is the occupation of Afghanistan by the United States. The known similarities is that, it's the same people, same country, same terrain, and the inferred similarity is that it ends in a quagmire, it ends in a failure. Okay, so let's start evaluating this argument by looking at the general critical questions, the ones that we would apply for any argument. And what we see here with this particular argument scheme, actually the later 2 general questions just turn into the specific questions for the argument scheme. But hang on, let me just run through them first. So first off, are the premises true, or at least plausible? Basically, yes. I honestly don't know much about Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan, the ancient occupations, but the British wars and the Soviet war in Afghanistan are both well known, well documented. Do the premises support the conclusion? Well, this is actually the subject for questions 1 through 4 of the critical questions for argument by analogy. So we'll get to those in a second. And similarly, has any relevant information been omitted from the premises? Well, this is really question 5, right? So let's take a look at those, right? So the critical questions were the number of reference analogs, the diversity of reference analogs, the number of similarities, the relevant similarities, and any possible differences. So the first 4 of those are about how much the analogy winds up supporting the conclusion, given that the premises are true. The final one is really just looking for missing information. And in this case, the missing information is going to be possible disanalogies, differences between all of these different military occupations of Afghanistan. So let's look at the first 4 first. So the number of reference analogs. Basically, there are a lot. There are either 4 or 6, depending on whether you count the British as 1 effort or 3. You could also say that the earlier efforts, the really ancient ones, are too distant. We'll get to that in a second. So there's the diversity and then the number of similarities. Our set of analogs becomes really diverse if we go ahead and include the experience of the armies of Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan in Afghanistan. However, because they become more diverse, you actually start losing similarities. You're, at this point, dealing with a very different culture at the time, right? I mean, these would be pre-Islam, for instance. um, and that sort of thing. And again, I also don't even really know much about those. Um, so we do, though. It looks like we've got some uh, a pretty good set of recent knowledge analogs that are fairly diverse. Um, and the core similarities are going to be important and relevant, the terrain and the people. And the terrain is one that can go um, back to the ancient occupations as well. And it's often blamed for the difficulty in um, foreign occupations of Afghanistan. Um, but what about possible differences? Well, actually, when the invasion of Afghanistan was launched, a lot of these were mentioned and emphasized a great deal. Technology is one. Obviously, there's a huge difference between the technology today and um, ancient empires like the Alexandrian Empire or the Mongol Empire. But um, even it was even suggested that there are big technological differences between the United States now and the Soviet Union when the Soviet Union occupied Afghanistan in the 70s. In particular, uh, during the lead up to the invasion, it was thought that things like GPS technology and better just communication and location would help deal with the mountains. Um, you can also say that the goals are different um, because, again, in the lead up to Afghanistan, it was asserted that the goal was not permanent occupation and nation building. Of course, it then turned out to be, and that effort failed. Um, Overall, I would say that this argument is strong. Of course, there's a lot of hindsight here as well, right? We now know that that all this argument came true, but I think going into it, you should have been able to see, and a lot of people did see that this was a problem. So, okay, let's try another argument by analogy, and this is one that I don't like as much. Okay, so this is literally just a meme I saw on social media and saved to my hard drive because it kind of bothered me. Um, so let me just read it. Firefighters, don't go looking for fires to put out. Paramedics, don't go looking for people to treat. Police shouldn't go looking for people to find and arrest. If we need you, we will call. And so this bothered me because I kind of know what the meme creator was getting at, especially with the image of these traffic stops, this roadblock. Police measures like traffic stops and stop and frisk often lead to disastrous consequences, people being innocent, unarmed people being killed, and they're annoying. Um, but so this is a conclusion I'm sympathetic to, but the argument itself doesn't work. Okay, but first of all, it's just clearly an argument by analogy. So let's break this down. Um, P1 is where we assert our known similarities. Police officers, firefighters, and paramedics, these are all first responders, right? We're used to lumping them together. P2, firefighters and paramedics don't go looking for people to help. Conclusion, um, police shouldn't go looking for criminals. Okay, so let's just jump to the critical questions, and we'll start with the general critical questions. Are the premises true, or at least plausible? Well, I mean, kind of no. I mean, you think, oh, well, firefight, there's no such thing as a fire patrol in the modern era, although there was in the 19th century, I think. But we do have preventative measures. We have fire codes. We have preventative measures, medicine. And these actually do more to keep people safe and healthy than the first responders do. Like they say, an ounce of prevention beats a pound of cure. Of course, police patrols may not be the best preventative medicine for crime. In fact, the best preventative medicine, preventative measure for crime. Jobs, a healthy economy, things for young men to do after school and when they're not at work. These are productive, meaningful activities. A healthy city. Also, preventative mental health measures. All of these are excellent preventative measures for crime. But they're things that obviously I think the meme writer would be sympathetic to, but they're different than what was being suggested, which just seemed to be to get rid of police patrols. Um, um, defund the police, if it's a real strategy, also has to go with refund the community, and um, that that um, that really is a necessary part of the argument. If you lose that part of the argument fails. So in any case, what else do we have? Do the premises support the conclusion? Again, this kicks us over to questions 1 through 4 that are specifically about argument by analogy, and has any relevant information been omitted from the premises? And this again will take us to question 5. So let's look at the first responder's argument. And again, I'm just not sure that P2 is true, and that, I think, undermines a lot right away. We want to look at the number of reference analogs, 2. Paramedics and firefighters. The diversity of them. Yeah, they're very diverse. Number of similarities. Well, there's really only one similarity, that they are first on the scene when an emergency occurs. The relevance of the similarities. Well, this one similarity is not particularly relevant. So although we score well in the diversity category, we lose out because we no longer have those core similarities that actually make the argument functional. So I don't think the premises provide, even if they were true, provide much support for the conclusion. And then you have to ask about relevant differences, which means, what information is missing. Well, the standard argument here is that police can deter crime. And firefighters don't deter fires, and paramedics don't deter injuries, right? The police are regarded as a preventative measure, even if they're not necessarily the best one. Also, criminals purposefully hide in a way that fires and injuries don't. Although I suppose you could say that diseases purposefully hide. They're evolved to hide their symptoms for a while, which is why we have tests and screenings. But again, preventative measures are good. I feel like part of the reason why this analogy doesn't work is that it goes against what should be a crucial argument for the person making who wants to prove this conclusion that we need alternatives to policing, which is that prevention is better than cure. Okay, so overall, I think this one is weak. Okay, so those are 2 samples. If you haven't done the last bit of homework yet, do it now. And now I'm going to switch over and look at the argument by analogy and the homework that you needed to evaluate. Okay, so this is a scene from a classic children's book, the book Beezus and Ramona by Beverly Cleary, and you're just supposed to analyze Ramona's argument. I'll read it. "Excuse me, Beezus," Ramona cut in. "Ramona, we do not put jelly on our mashed potatoes." "I like jelly on my mashed potatoes." Ramona stirred potato and jelly around with her fork. Ramona, you heard what your mother said. Father looked stern. If I can put butter on my mashed potatoes, why can't I put jelly? I put butter and jelly on toast. Okay, so the first thing you have to do here is recognize that this is the argument by analogy right here. So you don't want to include any of this other stuff. That's just scene setting. That's context. It makes things charming. Mother and father seem very parental in an old-fashioned way, but that's not the argument. This is the argument right here. So we want to identify the target analog, the reference analogs, known similarities, and inferred similarities. You may need to fill in missing information. Actually, in this case, I mean, that's just the standard way I phrase this question. I think everything we need is here. So there are actually two ways we can do this. We can either do it based on what the spread or what you're spreading the thing on. Let me explain this. So one way of analyzing the argument is to say that the reference analog is butter and the target analog is jelly. Alternately, you could say that the reference analog is toast, and the target analog is mashed potatoes. Either way, once you pick that initial thing, your known and inferred similarities get fixed, right? So if the reference analog is butter, then you say that the known similarity is that it goes on toast. Right? We know that both butter and jelly go on toast. The inferred similarity is that they should both go on mashed potatoes. It goes on mashed potatoes. And then if we make toast and mashed potatoes the analogs, then everything is just reversed. The known similarity for toast is that you put both butter and jelly on it. And am I doing this right? I'm sorry. The known similarity is that you put butter on it. And the inferred similarity is that you put jelly on it. Either way, you get to the same conclusion. You can put jelly on your mashed potatoes. All right, now let's look at the standard form. And I'm going to do this for the first version. So if the analogs are butter and jelly, premise one is butter and jelly are similar in that you put them both on toast. P2, you can put butter on mashed potatoes. Conclusion, you can put jelly on toast. And the way I wrote this, actually, I have the standard thing where I ask you to assess the truth. Obviously, these are both true. So the first critical question for any argument are the premises true? We've cleared, and so now we just go to the second two critical questions for any argument, which become the specific questions we want to cover for arguments by analogy. So, number of similarities. One similarity. That might be enough in this context. This is a standard conversation. This is not a legal case or anything like that. Okay, and I just noticed that in this question, I've got the questions listed in a different order. I'm going to use the official order, and I'm going to change this on the question sheet before the exercise is due. So you should see these questions in the right order. So the next question is supposed to be about the diversity of the analogs, and that's not applicable since there's only one. That is the diversity of the reference analog. The number of similarities is just one, but that might be enough. Enough in this context. Relevance of similarities, they're relevant. Possible differences, well, jelly is sweet and butter is savory. I don't actually think that's all that important, though. I mean, we mix savory and sweet all the time. So, seriously, just let Ramona put jelly on her mashed potatoes. This argument is strong. Kids 1, parents 0.